Got it.
Well, I'll start off here just by telling you a little bit about the project.
Okay.
It's titled Giving a Voice to the Voiceless. Our 8th grade character trait, each grade has a different trait that they focus on. Ours is justice. And the goal of the capstone project is to put a theory into the practice by giving restorative justice to those who have a story to tell, thus allowing them to heal their soul and put a name and face to the struggle for their students. My job is to ask you how Holocaust education is important in schools. So I'll start off with the first question. Why do you feel young people specifically need to know about the Holocaust?
So I think there's a lot of reasons that young people need to know about the Holocaust. I think that in particular, as we're growing up, as you know, from being babies to you know, growing up throughout the years, that we are shaped and molded by what we learn, what we feel, what we experience. And I think in particular that young people are in some ways more sensitive, more open-minded, more able to relate the history of what happened during the Holocaust to today, and to thinking about how do we apply those lessons, hopefully, that are gleaned from the history of the Holocaust. I also think that just in itself, just the history of the Holocaust, let alone its lessons, is so critical if we look at sort of the most recent history of the last 100 years, last century or so. I think it's a moment that shaped many things, not just for the Jewish community, but also the entire world. It shaped and created the Declaration of Human Rights, and the Nuremberg trials were a precedent for international tribunals, and you know, there's so many things that it had an impact on, that I think that in itself is important as well, the history and knowing its impact and its ripple effects on other issues and other things today. And also to look at the fact that unfortunately the Holocaust wasn't the last major genocide in our recent history, that since the Holocaust there have been, as we know, many other genocides. And so understanding that is something that I think is critical as we learn about wars and conflicts and so many other things, that we also look at genocide. And by looking at genocide, we need to look at the Holocaust in particular as well. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Do you feel enough is being done on the topic of the Holocaust in schools?
So I think that's a question of, is enough being done on the topic of the Holocaust is very relative. So I think every school is very different. In particular in Ohio, there's no standardized Holocaust education or curriculum for every school to follow. But there is for, say, math or English or other topics, right? You have certain things that you have to study and you have to accomplish. So for the Holocaust, that you don't have any kind of standardized curriculum, which is a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because it's a good thing when you have teachers like your teacher, Mrs. Alway, who really understands its importance and has herself learned a lot about the history and ensures that it's taught in a very meaningful way. In other schools, it may not be taught at all, or it might be one reading or one, and by reading I don't even mean a book. It might be simply an article or one, you know, a few lines about the Holocaust. So I think it varies, and I think there are some schools that are doing an incredible job of teaching about it, and then there are some schools that maybe could be doing more, and looking at it not just from a historical perspective, but also what it has to teach us about how we behave and interact today. And I think that also looking at it not just from a history lens or a language arts lens, but the many other aspects, sociology, psychology, kind of the many, many aspects of the Holocaust. So I think there's ways to integrate Holocaust education into schools that aren't always being being fully utilized, I guess.
And what would you say to someone who says that the Holocaust is overtaught?
What would I say to somebody that the Holocaust is overtaught? I think I would say to them to think about the individuals, and to name a few individuals who were actually murdered during the Holocaust. And, talking about that, if I name those few, and there are many, 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 for each few I could name, that I don't think there's a way that we could overteach this in the sense of the enormity of what happened, but also, as I already spoke about earlier, in terms of the ripple effects that it has had, as well as what I mentioned as well, that genocide has continued. So I don't think the only key to preventing and stopping genocide in the world is learning about the Holocaust. I think, we have to learn about other genocides as well, but I think one aspect, if we're going to learn anything, if we're going to respond, if we're going to ensure that the government takes action when we see genocide going on, we have to learn about what happened during the Holocaust. And we have to learn that the lack of action resulted in the enormity of what happened. So I don't think that there's a way to overteach it. I think there's always more to learn, and I think once you begin to learn about the Holocaust, you realize how much there is to learn, and how in many ways it can shape so many different aspects of other issues and other topics and connect it. So that's what I would say. I would ask first to think about those who perished.
And when you were in school,
Mm-hmm.
what was your Holocaust education like? What were you learning?
That's a great question. So I actually had, I would say, very little Holocaust education in sort of my K-12 years. I probably learned more because I'm Jewish, and I also went to Sunday school, and I had, in Sunday school, there was, films, and people would speak to us, and survivors would speak to us, and then I also had a personal connection as the grandchild of survivors, so kind of had that. But in my general education, I think we read the Diary of Anne Frank in maybe 6th grade, and spent a little bit of time on it, and otherwise, really, I would say only tangentially talked about it in relation to World War II, and less spent any focused time on the topic.
Tell me a little bit about your childhood, and did it lead you to pursue what you do now?
Sure. So that's a great question in terms of, did my childhood lead me to do this? And, in some ways I would say yes, and in some ways I would say no. I think that, having grandparents who are survivors, sort of growing up your whole life knowing that you had this connection to the Holocaust is, I'm sure, in many ways drew me to this work and to this field. However, that said, even with that background and with learning about it and being interested in it, I didn't say as a young person, this is what I want to spend my life doing. In high school, I actually wanted to be a doctor. But I think I also, as I went through college and kind of, learned more and grew more self-awareness, realized that I had this strong commitment to social justice and to issues of tolerance and equity and inclusion for all people, and saw some kind of injustice in my community in different places in those days, and really felt compelled to work towards greater levels of inclusion and tolerance. And so I think it wasn't inevitable from my childhood, but I think all of that kind of played a role into leading me into this field.
I read an article that sort of discussed this topic about you. There will come a day when there will be no survivors. And how do you think that will affect the Holocaust education?
I don't have a crystal ball, So, the